Welcome to the kiwimana Buzz.
Hey everyone, it's Gary here from the kiwimana Buzz, the beekeeping podcast where we talk about gardening, life, and often sometimes politics and environmental issues. We interview beekeepers from around the world and to get to different perspectives on how they keep their bees. And today we've got a guy called Tyson Kaiser, and he's actually a bee rescuer from the city of Los Angeles. And so this should be an interesting conversation. He actually rescues bees by, doing cutouts and other things like that. And it'd be interesting to hear about how he handles like Africanized bees, how he handles hive beetles, and just working as a beekeeper in the greater Los Angeles area. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Tyson Kaiser. Hi everyone, this is Gary here from the kiwimana Buzz, and this is episode 39. This is, the show notes for this one are kiwimana.co.nz/39. And today we've got Tyson Kaiser, and he's a bee rescuer from the city of Los Angeles. And his company is called Sweet Bee Removal, and his mission is to help the bees, or help the environment, by moving feral bees into hive boxes. So hi Tyson, how are you? We've given the audience a bit of an introduction, but take it from here and tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, my name is Tyson Kaiser, and I live here in Los Angeles, which I think is bee paradise. But what I end up kind of falling into being a beekeeper, having an interest in urban ecology and having urban farming, chickens and such, and gardens, that I kind of felt like I wanted to get into, to have native bees around and to kind of influence, bring more native bees back into the urban ecology. And so my mother bought me some native bees and I installed them, and they promptly took off. And then I kind of realized that, this whole beekeeping thing was kind of under my nose. I never really knew it. So I decided to, I hooked up with Backwards Beekeepers, which was a local, beekeeping group, and became an urban beekeeper and urban bee rescuer as well, which is translated into my line of work.
Oh, fantastic! And how long have you been beekeeping for?
It's about 2 years now. Yeah,
oh, that's fantastic.
It doesn't seem very long, but I mean, I've learned quite a bit in the amount of time. It's been kind of a process of immersion. I think that once I got started, I just never did anything else. I actually quit my 9-to-5 job and just basically became full-time bees.
Wow. Yeah, I guess because you see different situations with the bees, you probably learn quite a lot of different sort of things, eh?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing that's attractive to me about it, is that it never seems that I go through a day where I'm not presented with some new challenge. Especially with bee removals in urban areas, you're presented with all these different environments where bees will set themselves up, or they're 30 feet up a ladder, or whatever the case may be. There's always some challenge every day, and that's the kind of thing that keeps me going.
Yeah, fantastic. And so how many colonies you've currently got?
I have 9, and
okay.
Basically I try to, whenever I rescue a colony, I try to always know where it's going, and if I have room to put it, then I make sure that I that it goes there, but I also make sure that I give my bees to people that are other urban beekeepers, so that they can have bees as well. So every time I plan to do a removal, I make sure that on the end of it, those bees are going to go someplace at the end of the day. And so I've currently have room for 9, and I'm full, and I'm looking at next year's spaces, and I'm developing some new spaces to put bees. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. So do you have like a list of people that want bees, and you just go from the list or something, do you?
Yeah, in fact, I do. I kind of cultivate people, or try to find them, and I call them bee hosts. People that will either hold my bees for me, or people that are just beekeepers in general, urban beekeepers, and I call them bee needers. And I have a list of those as well. So whenever it comes to the point where I'm not quite sure where my bees are going to go, I start poking around and making sure that everybody, the people can get bees if they need them, and that I source them out appropriately.
Yeah.
Other than that, I really try to make sure that I never run out of spaces. I always make sure I have like 1 or 2 reserve spaces. So if one of my urban beekeepers can't keep bees for me, then I can take them for them or move them to a different location. That way, I always have some space somewhere. I never try to fill up, but at this point, I'm pretty close to full.
Yeah, absolutely. And before in your introduction, you said that Los Angeles is a bee paradise. Why do you say that? Just an environment, or?
Well, I mean, for case in point today, it's 80 degrees Fahrenheit out. It's a wonderful day. We have a huge sprawling city, tons of suburbs that go on in all directions, a lot of exotics from both hemispheres planted all over. So we have, abundant blooms coming in all times of the year for the most part, with a small dearth coming through in around, August to September. For the most part, it's constant forage. Last year, I think my bees didn't get out for 2 days out of the year. That means that there was only 2 days out of last year where it was cold enough that they didn't actually get out of the hive. So to me, it just means that bees are here all the time, constantly working, constantly moving. Plus, there's kind of an unlimited amount of areas that they can go into. There's all these, properties that aren't being well tended, so they can move into walls or trees or whatever the case may be. It's estimated that in Los Angeles, there's 2 to 9 feral bee colonies per square mile. And when you consider the size of the city, which is massive, that means that there's thousands and thousands and thousands of feral hives all over the city. And, which gives me limitless business, which is great. But also, it's kind of a melting pot for all these, these bees coming from different sources to become, beautiful hybridized feral bees.
Yeah, fantastic. And so how are your bees going at the moment? Are they all doing really well?
For the most part, pretty well. I'm doing some experiments to try to see if I can make them do less well. For the most part, most of my bees are foundationless. And I kind of let them do as much forage as they can on their own. I try not to intervene, unless I have to, which means, I don't feed them. I definitely don't treat them. But I don't feed them and I don't provide them pollen if they don't seem to need it. If they seem like they're doing well, I just let them do what they're doing, and that's fine. But I do have a couple hives where I'm experimenting with foundation and feeding sugar water, just to see how that affects them. And cause I try not to be dogmatic about what I'm doing. So I at least want to experiment and see how they do. But even, I don't think I have a hive that's really struggling right now. For the most part, they're all doing really well. I have some young colonies from this year, and I have a couple colonies from last year that are doing extremely well. And the ones from this year are doing very well. So I can't really complain.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea. Just let the bees be bees, eh? Let them live as naturally as possible, I guess.
I think, it's not for everybody. I think that, foundationless isn't necessarily I don't think is like some kind of, perfect way of doing something, but I think that there's a lot to allowing the bees to, they've done pretty well for the last 65 million years. I think we should trust their instincts and allow them to, do their own part as much as they can, on their own without having to interfere as much as we can possibly let them to do. So, I think it's probably positive overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as far as foundationalists, do you put a starter strip in there, or how do you work that out?
Yeah, I put a guide on there, a guide on each frame to kind of get them started. That's developed. I used to use popsicle sticks, which are kind of, wooden slabs, and I glue them in and put a little bit of melted beeswax on there. But now I use what's called wedge top frames, the Langstroth frames, where I use a wedge top and I just snap the wedge out, stick it in there. And usually what you would do is use that wedge to nail in the foundation in the top. But I just forego the foundation and just use that wedge and paint that with a little bit of beeswax. And they take to it pretty well. But if your hive's not level, if it's not, straight at all, then they're gonna do a lot of cross-combing. So it's really incumbent on the beekeeper, if you're going to do a foundation, to go in and make sure that, after a week or two, when you've put in guided foundationless frames, to go in and kind of correct and make sure that they're on the right path. Either that or re-level your hive and make sure that they're not going to cross-comb. It can be pretty messy if you don't bother to pay attention to it.
Oh, absolutely. And and as you say, make sure the hive's perfectly level. Otherwise you get this crazy sideways sort of stuff going on.
I'm helping somebody right now. I have a couple people that I'm mentoring, and one of them has 2 hives that are completely cross-combing. It's going every direction. It just looks like this on the inside of the hive. And you cannot imagine how hard that is to harvest, because you basically take the entire super off, try to get the bees out of it, turn it upside down, cut it apart to get everything out of there. And it's a lot of work. So, just having, even just when you install it, go in and a week later, make sure everybody's kind of lining everything up right.
Yeah.
If you inspection, their things look kind of wonky, go ahead and try to correct them early. It's the best method to do.
Absolutely. Another trick too is if you've got built-out comb, is you put them in between one not built-out comb. So
right.
It's kind of like, what do they call it? Checkerboarding it sort of thing? Sort of having it.
Well, checkerboarding is a different concept.
Yeah,
you're
that's
right.
a different thing,
similar
but sort of,
you
yeah.
Put a drawn one in between an empty one, which is great if you have those.
Yeah,
Or if you harvest a frame, just cut the honey off and leave like a half inch at the top, and that'll act as a guide for the next one that's coming down. So, it's good when you've already established, when you're starting out, you have a new colony and you put in foundationless, you're going to end up with cross comb. It's really incumbent to really take a good look at it and make sure that you're straight, or you're keeping it straight. And after a year or so, then it's pretty easy to keep the whole hive pretty straight. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I've been looking at your photos on your, I think it's your Twitter account, and you've got a vented suit. How are you finding that in the hot conditions in Los Angeles?
I can't live without it. I mean, I do 3 to 4 removals a week, usually hours long cutouts. In the summer in Los Angeles, it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty predictably for most days. And, I have what I call white man's disease, where I just sweat like a pig. And even in a vented suit, it doesn't help me. It helps, but it doesn't eliminate it. I have to have some air around me. I'll just be miserable. I used to wear, regular just cloth suits and just go in for a 2 or 3 or 4 hour cutout. And, I'd walk away and the thing would just be draping on me like a sheet and just covered in sweat. And, the bees are stinging you on your shoulders because it's just hanging on you. And, it just didn't work for me. And that's when I found the ventilated suits, or the vented suits, basically, 3 layers of fabric.
Yeah.
They're all mesh basically. And it's basically bee armor. You're bulletproof. No matter, I could walk into a hive of 100,000 angry bees and it would not bother me at all. They just don't get through. There's no way.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Yeah, I've got one here. I'm just trying it out before we start selling them. So yeah, I think they're fantastic. I got stung the other day, but it was on my back of my leg, and I kind of leaned over and kind of crushed it. But even when they do sting you, it doesn't really hurt that much. So
the only time I've been stung in one is when I've actually pressed a bee in between, like say a wall and the suit. I actually got one in the back of my head recently. So I was looking underneath the hive on the roof, and I have my head back there, and a bee got pressed in between there. That's the only time I've ever gotten hit by one. And I mean, I'll go for weeks without getting stung. And when you're actually doing cutouts, it's kind of remarkable. I used to think that was just kind of the manner of things. I would just get stung 4 or 5 or 6 times a week, and now I just don't. Since the ventilated suits came along, it's just I'm impervious to bee stings.
Yeah, I think they're very good, especially in the height of summer. Also.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so what's one thing you wish you knew now before you started beekeeping, or when you first started? I
think it just learn to relax. I think a lot of times when you start off as a beekeeper, you have some expectations of doing everything right and trying to guess what the bees are doing, or freaking out about what the bees are possibly doing. You're not really sure. Bees are really remarkably resilient, and they're good at doing what they're doing. And I think the one thing I take away is like, I spent so much time vexing and freaking out and being concerned or whatever about the bees. And for the most part, they were fine. I think bees are amazingly adaptable creatures, and I wish I'd kind of given them a little bit more credit when I started, that they're capable of doing what they need to do. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think bees often fix mistakes from bad beekeeping anyway, don't they?
Right. I mean, they're they do what they do, and they don't necessarily need a beekeeper to be there to make sure that they exist. I mean, contrary to a lot of what, modern commercial beekeeping is about, where, they seem to think that bees are necessarily diseased or necessarily unable to feed themselves or all these things. They can't build their own comb. I mean, it almost seems as if they're not leaving the bees the option to be themselves, to do what they can do. Bees have been existing, especially here in LA. I mean, I'd see the evidence all the time. Bees have set up in amazing circumstances all over the city, and they thrive and they do incredibly well. So I think we need to give bees a little more credit for the fact that they're entirely capable of existing with or without us. And they're hardly as vulnerable as a lot of people seem to perceive them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tyson, what excites you about beekeeping?
I think it's a really diverse. It's not just to me. It's not just a hobby or just a pastime. It's literally become my life. It's become my my life work. I'm not saying that everybody has to get into that, but for me, what I really get into it about is that I never stop learning. Bees constantly have something to teach me. I think if I got up in the day and I didn't feel that the bees weren't teaching me something, or I wasn't learning something, or I wasn't excited about what I was doing, and I wasn't feeling that this was being a good outlet for me, I don't think I would. I just don't see it being possible. I would just stop beekeeping if that was the case. If I ever felt like I knew everything about beekeeping, I would just stop. So being somebody who's a lifelong learner, to me, beekeeping is like this endless font of learning and adventure and exploration and, this amazing experience with these creatures. I think that alone is enough to keep me going for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you learn that you don't know everything, eh?
I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, it seems to think that people, I seem to see myself, I think that I kind of know what bees are doing, and I stop and try to forget what I've learned and look at them and see what they're doing, and they show me things that I didn't really think that was actually going on. I'm still constant. I mean, as much as I think I have to figure out how to get them out of wherever they're at, people are paying me to do so. I like to think that I'm entirely capable of doing that. That doesn't mean that bees don't have a lot to show me, and sometimes that I'm not entirely in control. And that's a really refreshing thing, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's the biggest issue facing bees in your area at the moment?
I think it's mostly ignorance, actually. I think that people seem to think, I mean, the good news is I make a good living rescuing bees, people that actually have become fairly more in tune with the idea that bees are very important for our environment. But I'm still dealing with a lot of people that seem to think that bees are a threat, or they're on par with yellow jackets or wasps or whatever, and they don't see them in the same way. I constantly get calls from people that I've been trying to kill these bees and I need you to save them now because I can't kill them. Most of it's just about education with people that they have to kind of learn to understand that bees are part of our environment and they're not going away.
Yeah.
And just people try to end up making them go away or trying to force them out. They're entrenched in our urban environment here, and Southern California in general, but especially LA is just, it's intrinsic part of our experience in the city that bees are around, and that LA is a partially wild place, and sometimes in that way sometimes. So, but yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge right now is to keep people from killing bees, to realize that they're a good thing for our environment, and also to help LA, the city of LA, allow urban beekeeping and to recognize bees as a positive part of our urban environment. Right now, there's a big push by some people, some organizations within the city to try to get the city itself to adopt urban beekeeping resolutions so that people can keep bees legally. As it is, we're all, myself and a bunch of other people, hundreds of other people, are basically renegades because we're beekeeping without licenses or without regulation or without the blessing of the city. We do it knowing that we're doing the greater good, but at the same time, the city doesn't recognize us as being part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. So it'd be great if we could get more legalization efforts in the LA city area. That would be a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so is it currently illegal to keep bees in urban areas in LA?
In LA, yes. LA City, LA County, which is a much larger area, is they're okay with it. But anywhere in the incorporated LA City area, there's effectively no regulation governing the keeping of urban bees. So essentially, what happens is if you're keeping bees and your neighbors complain, they don't like it or whatever the case may be, they can call the city, and the city can give you 3 days to remove your bees or face a fine. Generally, there's not like a bee police roaming around. Cops are not, they're not going to come knocking on the door if they see a beehive or whatever the case may be. But it's kind of a thing where the city has to regulate or enforce a law if, there's a complaint about it. In general, I've heard that very rarely enforced, and it usually has to do with a neighbor or something like that being a problem. Yeah. So for urban beekeepers in LA, it's a really good idea to give lots of honey to your neighbors, make sure everybody's on the same page as you are, and then that way you'll probably avoid most problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep them sweet, literally. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing is make sure they don't fly in the path of a footpath or a, sidewalk, as you guys call it. So
that's really the big issue. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of small lots in LA where there's a lot of traffic. It's a crowded city, but it's also very big. So, I have bees on roofs a lot. I found that roofs, enable bees to kind of go about their business 20, 30 feet up from, most passersby. A lot of times they can't even see it. You can't see my beehives from any of my beehives from the street. They're not available to view. So the bees are basically going about their business. Nobody else is otherwise on the street. And, that to me is harmony. And yeah, that's true. I mean, I've spent some time, keeping awake thinking, oh my God, those bees are getting a little feisty right now. I really would, hope they don't sting somebody passing by, but that's never happened. And I actually think I'm far more, I wouldn't call it paranoid, but overly cautious to make sure that, my bees are calm and well managed and well taken care of. They're not crowded. They're not getting feisty. They're not stinging passersby. And I think that's an important thing for any urban beekeeper to really keep in mind, is that you have to keep your bees happy. Otherwise they're going to start getting angry and stinging random people, and you've created a problem. It's our duty to make sure our bees are happy in order to make sure that doesn't happen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you ever come across Africanized bees in Los Angeles?
Well, actually, I get that question a lot because I do removals, and I can say pretty much that from the description I've heard of Africanized bees, that I haven't actually really run across them. I've run across some very angry bees, what I call mean bees or feisty bees. I just call them feisty because I think all bees have the potential to be defensive depending on their circumstances. You can take some really nice docile bees, get them incredibly crowded, and and they could be pretty nasty if you want. Even the Russian bees that people are so fond of in the American Northeast, they can be pretty mean as well. Old German black bees can be pretty mean, but that doesn't mean that Africanized bees don't exist. They do. My understanding is that, and I've talked with a lot of beekeepers from rural areas of Nevada and Arizona, that, you can't even approach some of those hives. Some of those hives are, you can't even really see them 100 feet away, and you're starting to get hit in the face for, just for passing by. That would never exist here. I mean, even though Africanized bees have been endemic in Southern California since 1991 or 94, they could never really exist even in suburban areas, much less urban areas, because a hive that's stinging people 100 feet away is going to get nuked. The people are, there's just no way a hive like that can exist. So my theory is, and I don't have any evidence for it, my theory is that if Africanized bees do exist in LA, they've basically self-selected the docile genetics to move into human populations, because those are the ones that didn't get nuked on the way in. So if those Africanized genetics have moved into urban areas, they basically have been below the radar. They've been calm, mellow. So they've self-selected more docile genetics in order to be closer to urban environments, to human environments where they'd be closer to humans in general. And then because of that, they're mixing with already feral populations that existed before the 90s, that they've kind of hybridized into the local population, that we basically have a population, a mixed population of very genetically diverse bees, that tend to exhibit some defensive behavior, but in general are pretty moderate. I'd say greater than 90% of the hives I deal with, I would call them workable. Less than 10% would be the ones I would think like, God, I really need to requeen these guys and get them mellowed out because they're too hot to work. And that's literally less than 10%. And I would never call them Africanized. So I don't think I've ever really mapped them. If they were really that nasty, I haven't seen them.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're giving them to beginners, you don't want to have really hot bees anyway.
Sometimes bees turn hot too. I mean, if you can give bees to somebody, and then 3 years down the road, their queen has been replaced several times, and the bees just start getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Yeah. And you have a hive that's been 3 or 4 or 5 years old that's been lightly managed. And sometimes they get really big and super full. They can be really, really angry bees. The best thing to do is just split them and, requeen them, or allow them to requeen themselves to their daughters, and then, the daughter tends to be a lot calmer, than sometimes the hot queen. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have a problem with small hive beetles in LA yet?
We're just starting to. They weren't really much of an issue. They kind of landed on the scene about 3 years ago, I've heard. But they were so minuscule. They basically are kind of a rarity. But we just we're going through a really rough drought right now here in LA, and it's the fourth driest year since 1890s. We only had like 5 inches of rain last year, which is, basically high desert conditions. It's really rough time for a lot of stuff. Thankfully, there's a lot of water, areas around here, but at the same time, this put a lot of hives in stress. We had a low nectar year and a pretty low pollen output. So even a lot of feral colonies were exhibiting a lot of stress. And, I'd say about 3 out of 4 colonies either managed or feral. If I'm removing, feral hives or dealing with somebody else's managed hives, 'cause I do some work for other people for managing their hives, did have small hive beetles, and actually in a pretty good quantity, not just like 1 or 2 here and there, but 10, 20. And, I did see one hive that was basically succumbing to small hive beetles. It was basically getting slimed out, and that was a feral colony.
Yeah.
So I think they're here to stay, and it's partly due to, small hive beetles kind of being introduced in Florida and then being shipped over with the migrant beekeepers to bring them into the almond orchards. And now they've kind of really hit in California. We have a stressed out year on bees that are really not doing well. And then next thing you know, I think we're, 3 out of 4 hives are facing some evidence of small hive beetle populations. So,
yeah. That's lucky. That's one thing we don't have to deal with. So
try to keep it that way. I mean, it's a good thing you're on an island because you have the ability to control it. I know Australia is having a real problem with that now too, and that's, you have to lock that down. Don't ever accept Australian hives in New Zealand because you could end up with it really easily, and they just spread. I think it's another situation like Varroa where you have to think of it in terms of dealing with it not in a predatory sense, but can we make it a parasitical sense where it's manageable. I don't think we're going to eradicate small hive beetles. I can put in traps like physical traps, oil traps, and things like that to reduce the numbers to keep them from ever really getting a toehold in a lot of strong hives. Weak hives might succumb, but the whole point is to kind of put your beehives in environments where they can't really get in there and really start to do damage. And if we treat the small hive beetles like dogs treat fleas, kind of like the same way that I feel about Varroa mites, then the bees will learn to adapt, to learn to deal with those things. And after generations and generations, the small hive beetle threat will be less of a threat, but it will never really go away.
Yeah. Isn't it true that you put them into direct sunlight that helps them, doesn't it? Helps the bees.
That's the experience I've kind of been having, and also the one that I've heard. Thankfully, a lot of my hives are already in full sun because I do a lot of roof hives. And I basically place them entrance faced east or south or both. And full sun is kind of hard to avoid when you're on a roof. Yeah. That means I'm constantly trying to keep the bees cool enough. I've done a lot of things to help out with that, but small hive beetles apparently have a real problem with it. The other benefit of having hives on a roof is part of the life cycle of the small hive beetle is come and infest the hive. Larvae come out, they crawl out of the hive, crawl 3 to 10 feet away and pupate in the ground. Well, if they're on a roof, there's no going to pupate in the ground, so you're not perpetuating the life cycle of the small hive beetle. It's not the first round of small hive beetles that you have to worry about. It's the pupated ones that come back and come up to your hive after the fact. Then you've gone from 10 small hive beetles to 50 or 60. That's when you're going to start to have your hive overwhelmed. So keeping your bees off the ground or at least in full direct sunlight, definitely not in shade, is going to end up helping out reducing those small hive beetle numbers, and then the bees will learn to kind of keep them at bay and push them into the corners of the hive and make them, incapable of breeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with your work of rescuing bees in buildings, do you actually dismantle walls and do stuff like that?
Well, that's the fun part. I mean, I actually kind of love it because first of all, I don't do repairs. So I'm not a contractor. I'm not licensed to do repairs on walls. I know a lot of beekeepers that they'll promise like, oh, I'll fix the wall or whatever. I'm sure they do some sort of job. And I've actually run into a few, rescued colonies that end up, kind of getting messed up because somebody walled them over before they were done. But my job is great because I just go and I let the homeowner know completely I'm not going to do repairs. I'll do the minimum amount of damage necessary to get into where the bees are at to fully expose them. So I'll if it's in a wall, say, I'll cut it on the stud so that people can come in and do a repair. But yeah, I get it cut up in walls. I love doing stucco walls, which are really common here. Bees love getting behind stucco here, and which means I get to take a big angle grinder and a diamond bit blade and cut open stucco walls, and there's dust everywhere, and it's great kind of fun deconstructing spaces and getting into and figuring out where they're at. And that to me is the really fun challenge. But yeah, I do some damage. Thankfully not too much, so people seem to respect it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't come across asbestos walls, do you?
I do, but when I do most removals, I have a particle mask, especially with the stucco walls. There's fine particles flying everywhere. So underneath my bee suit, in my hood, I'll have a fine particle mask. Asbestos insulation isn't really a big deal in LA so much because there's just really not that much insulation. Like I said, it's November and we have summer temperatures right now. So there's only a couple months out of the year that may be cold enough to require insulation. So insulation never really caught on here in the same way that it's caught in other parts of the country. I think if I thought it was there or it was going to be an issue, I just wouldn't hesitate putting on a particle mask because they're cheap and that's what I use anytime, all the time anyway. So.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I know it's fantastic that owners let you do that because I've struck here a lot of people don't like you doing it. So, pulling the walls apart and stuff. So.
Yeah, you said that you get mostly swarm removals, but you don't get a lot of feral bees traveling around. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, we do. Oh, we do get a lot of calls about, bees flying to roofs and onto walls and stuff, but I just think the homeowners aren't really too keen about having to repair it afterwards, so they generally call pest controllers, which is sad, but yeah, that's what happens here.
Well, that's my thing is I always get calls from people and they're kind of, we call them kicking the tires, trying to estimate how much it's going to cost them to do a removal. And I'll tell them right out the gate. I mean, I'm not going to spend a bunch of my time trying to convince them that to do a removal, there's plenty of people that will pay for it. But what I'll say is, I understand my service is expensive. But what I do is I guarantee my work. I go in and remove the bees physically. I remove every aspect of the hive, the honey, everything, get everything out, the queen, everything. And then I'll backfill everything in with insulation and exclude the bees from ever getting in there again or paint the interior or whatever the case may be to cover up the old scent of the comb. Whereas a pest control operator, they're operating on a margin that's totally different than mine. They're not even doing the same service. They're poking a hole in the wall and shoving in some poison. And then, a year later when that poison is abated and there's a swarm passing by, they smell that old colony in the wall and boom, there you go. You got another problem again. So, homeowners can either pay, a couple $100 every few years to have it, taken care of piece by piece or have me come in and do it in one shot. So I'll tell them right at the gate. I don't bother trying to compete with exterminators. We're not operating on the same basis. I respect what they do. I have what I do, and the twain don't really meet. And so for me, in most cases, I have people that are very grateful just to have the bees gone, permanently gone, and that's basically what I guarantee that they're gone. So. Yeah,
fantastic. And I suppose it's very time intensive, isn't it? So how long does it normally take for an average one?
Well, tomorrow I have a removal in a jacuzzi, like an outdoor hot water tub kind of situation. It's basically been neglected for a couple of years, and the homeowners didn't either see or didn't notice that bees had moved into them. And I think it's probably a 1.5 year old colony. And to get them out of there, they're also really walled in behind, so it's really hard for me to get into. I'm actually have to jack up the fiberglass jacuzzi to get underneath it. I estimated it 6 hours just to do that removal for maybe a 1-year-old colony. And that's just to get, basically it's an hour even just to set up before I even start removing any bees at all. It takes me an hour just to get all the gear in place and get everything set up and, make sure everything's laid down, plastic and sort of, honey and a mess everywhere. So it's a lot of setup. There's a lot of disposables to put into place, and there's a lot of, getting ready, and then you can't really guarantee they're going to go the way you want them to all the time. So, there's a little bit of leeway there. Yeah. But most removals are between 5 and 7 hours, for large cutouts. For very tiny cutouts, I can do it in like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a very labor intensive thing, isn't it? Yeah, it'd be great if you could send some photos of that tomorrow, and we could include that in the show notes for the listeners.
I'd be happy to. I think I have some already just loaded, so I'll be happy to send that to you.
Yeah, that'd be good. And the show notes for the show, guys, is kiwimana.co.nz/39. And so, what's your plans as a beekeeper next season, for the coming season?
Well, I think I really want to start getting into queen rearing. I think the whole concept of queen genetics and bee biology in general is fascinating. I mean, you think about how they spread genes and how they reproduce. It's just incredible. And the more you know, the more you're flabbergasted about how they do this. But I think I really wanted to kind of crack the nut of queen genetics and understanding how to propagate genetics that you think are favorable and not. I'm not necessarily interested in creating purebred strains of anything, or I don't want poodle bees, but I want bees that if I have bees I like, I want to be able to give queens to people that I know that they're gonna enjoy the experience of having them around. So to that end, I really want to get into queen rearing this spring coming up, and that'll probably go into a multi-year kind of thing. I think that I can probably. Well, I'm selling bees as well. I sell some of the feral bees that I get. Sometimes I create packages from swarms I get. I'll put them into nukes and I'll develop small nukes to sell to people. But there's definitely a market for localized feral queens that can withstand our particular conditions here. And I like to be that person that can help provide that. I know there's some others that are doing it probably better than I am, but I can stand to learn as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you going to use grafting, or how are you going to raise your queens?
Probably grafting, just to try it out. I know that seems a little bit more labor intensive. There's easier ways to do it, and grafting definitely seems like the hard way to go. But I'm kind of into challenges, so I don't have a problem trying it out and failing.
Yeah,
I'm willing to make mistakes. So I think that's probably the route I'm going to go. Seems definitely like you get more bang for your buck if you're capable of doing that. Once you get into that, once you're doing that, you can produce queens on a much greater level with relative ease. But you're right. There's definitely easier ways to raise queens. And I'm not sure that, anything is necessarily superior depending what your needs are. If your needs are 10 or 15 queens a year, you can easily make your own, just pulling frames and making small mating nukes throughout the year. Boom, you can make enough queens to keep yourself very happy with that.
Yeah, I think grafting is a good way to make a lot of queens, and especially if you're selling them to beginners, it's a great way to do it.
I was exposed to. I went to this last year. I went to the Pacific Northwest treatment-free beekeeping conference. Kind of a big mouthful, but it was a West Coast event for some of us treatment-free beekeepers, and I met the owner of Zia Bees. She's Melanie Kirby. She's pretty amazing. She's a New Mexico beekeeper, and she kind of came from the industry of grafting. It's kind of like old hat to her now that she's a treatment-free beekeeper, and she has seasonal hives that she moves around in New Mexico. She gave a demonstration about grafting with bees and made it look way simpler than it really is. It's not easy. I'm kind of not looking forward to doing it and making tons of mistakes. It's very difficult to scrape out a larva and not end up fudging it somehow. And but to me, that's a challenge I'm willing to get into. So that's probably where I'm going to go.
Oh, absolutely. It's a good. I think the biggest thing is the time of year. When they're building up for spring, that's the time to do it. Not when they're winding down for winter. So just pick your months properly, and you should be fine. Yeah. So you say you do actually treat your varroa mites at all, or you do not have treatment free there at the moment?
I don't do anything about them.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It seems really bizarre to a lot of people. Like, why wouldn't you do anything about them? The feral bees that we seem to get here have a pretty strong hygienic capability. I have seen varroa. I have never seen a hive succumb to varroa. I've only seen a couple hives that have apparent diseases that were transmitted by varroa, like K-wing or Israeli. Was that the deformed virus?
Deformed wing virus. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was missing the term. But I only recently saw that in one hive that had that really bad, and that was a hive that was on foundation. that was a neglected hive, and the bees were upsized in cell size. There's a big theory here amongst a lot of treatment-free beekeepers that cell size has a lot to do with the tendency to succumb to varroa based on, the size of the brood and during its buildup. I'm not entirely sure I'm on board with that. I think one of the best things that bees can do is have hygienic behavior and to be able to try to resist varroa on their own without necessarily having to work with small cell. With foundationalists, I let them build whatever size they want. So I can't really say whether they're creating a size that resists varroa or not. But what I do know is that I rarely see it. I'm kind of surprised. It's kind of like seeing a queen for me. Oh, there's a varroa. I never see bees covered in varroa. I know that varroa, they're usually not very visible until they're really visible. They tend to hide in plates in the bee's tail, and it's not easy to see exactly where they're at all the time. Yeah. But I really, rarely see them, and I'm kind of shocked when I do. My biggest threat right now is small hive beetles because they're very obvious, and they have a much greater chance of taking down a hive than I've ever seen varroa in the area. So no, I don't do any treatments.
It's good.
I think at the minimum I would probably do like a powdered sugar method just to kind of get a mite count, like a drop off mite count. But truthfully, I haven't seen the need for it yet.
Wow.
No, I'm saying yet because it could happen.
Well, I guess because they're feral bees, maybe they're actually adapted to the mites. They've had them longer, so.
Well, that's kind of the theory. I mean, that rather than kind of viewing bees as being disease prone, you view them as disease resistant. And there's kind of a theory that the varroa mites and some of these diseases are actually doing us and our bees a favor by allowing them to go through the process of learning to resist them. We allow them to adapt, and so they cannot succumb to those in the future. So rather than simply viewing varroa as a pernicious pest, view it as a challenge for your bees in the sense that if they can learn to adapt and resist the having to succumb to varroa, if they can learn to live with them, then we've already solved the problem for them, and they've solved the problem for themselves. And that's kind of where a lot of us come from here. I'm not speaking for everybody in treatment-free area in LA, but there's a lot of us here that kind of believe that we're creating bees that are multiply resistant to a lot of stuff. I don't treat for anything and I haven't really needed to. That says a lot right there. So. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because I think the thing is that you guys have had mites since was it 87 or late 80s?
Yeah, it was 86, I think. It was long before I was on the scene. 84, I think.
Yeah.
Long before I was ever on it. So, they've definitely been around here for a long time. I'm not saying they've gone away. I definitely see them, but I just don't see hives succumbing to them.
No, I think the resistance is happening. So, it's good. The actual, tolerance and stuff. I think because we've only had them since 2000. So we're kind of like 10 years, behind you guys. So.
Well, from what I understand, when varroa mites first hit the scene, they basically decimated feral colonies because anything that wasn't treated at that time basically completely succumbed to got overrun by varroa, and feral bee colonies nationwide completely collapsed. Not to say they completely disappeared, but they really, really suffered incredibly. But since that point, and this was many years ago, this is a decade ago or more, since that point, feral colonies have completely rebounded, and it appears that they're having very little difficulty kind of managing it, like fleas on a dog kind of thing. Fleas will never really kill a dog, hopefully. That's kind of where we think we're at with the varroa in Southern California.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so you've been keeping bees for a couple of years, and when you started beekeeping, if you can remember back that far, what's one book that you would recommend to people if you could only recommend one beekeeping book for them?
I think one of the best books to start with for a newbie beekeeper would be Complete Idiot's Guide to Beekeeping. There's a lot of those beekeeping for dummies or, idiot this or idiot that, but Complete Idiot's Guide for Beekeeping is Complete Idiot's Guide to Beekeeping is probably one of them. It's the least intensive. It basically gives you the bare bones to get you started. So for initial hobbies that doesn't want to be buried under the weight of all this negative information about all these treatments and all these things that are going to go horrible with your bees, and your bees are sick, and all these things. This doesn't explain that at all. It basically just says, look, you can keep bees. This is how simple it can be. This is how easy it is to go and get swarms if you want. You can get your own bees. It's written by Dean and Ramona Stieglitz, and they're kind of there are a couple icons in the treatment-free community here in the United States. In fact, they host the Northeast Treatment-Free Conference in Massachusetts, I believe, every year. And they're really great people. But really, it's beyond their own reputation. The book itself is just bare bones. It doesn't try to confuse you. And for beginning beekeepers, it's basically a really good primer on getting started without getting intimidated with a bunch of unnecessary or deleterious knowledge that doesn't help you in the long run. So
I think that's a good idea for a book because sometimes you can overwhelm people with a whole lot of science, can't you?
Right, I think so. And I mean, I know that people want to inform people as much as they can, but there's a certain point where you've reached too much, and that it's not getting picked up in the way that it could be. After 10 or 12 chapters of stuff, then I think most people are pretty full, and they'd rather just get on the business of trying to learn bees and really what's the best way to learn about bees but to have them and to experience them and observe them. So I think it's better to get those people on that path, get them out there getting bees and starting their hives, so that way they learn the best way, which is the observable way, the workable way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think the best way is to sit there and watch them all day,
Yeah,
to watch what they're doing.
I wish I could sit there. Like I always try to, before I do any inspection, just sit and at least lay with my hives, sit by my hives and just watch the entrance for like 10, 15 minutes and just kind of get a vibe of what's going in and out.
Yeah.
How they're responding, how they look, just try to just kind of feel them for a while, and then go about your inspection. So I think that's a really good thing to do. Always give lots of time for inspections, especially when you have only a couple hives. Give it kind of get into the moment and kind of see it from their perspective and really see what they're doing. And that's the best way to really, see what your bees are up to, is to observe them closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's the best way for listeners to get in touch if they have a cutout to do, or if they need to get some bees? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Tyson?
Currently here in LA, there's an organization called Honey Love.
Yeah.
And it's at honeylove.org. It's all one word, honeylove.org. And they have a rescue bees portion on the page. It's pretty easy to navigate to. And then there's 5 or 6 different ethical bee removal companies on that list that basically rescue bees on a regular basis. I'm one of them. Not trying to toot my own horn. There's some great people out there that do rescue bees along with me. And basically, we always have bees. I'm never short of bees. That's not my problem. So if people in LA wanted to get bees from me, that'd be a good place to start. My company's called Sweet Bee Removal. And it's at sweetbeeremoval.com as well. Great way to get a hold of some really lively, locally adapted feral bees. I always have tons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to get local bees that adapt to the LA area. I mean, I wouldn't recommend people buy packaged bees from other states, especially ones from a colder state in America.
Right.
They won't be adapted and they won't last. So yeah, get a hold of Tyson, guys, and get some of his adapted bees there. That's the thing, yeah. Oh, well, thanks Tyson for coming on the show. If you stay on the line there, but I'll just close the show off there. So all those links that Tyson mentioned will be in the show notes. That's kiwimana.co.nz/39. So, and thanks heaps again, Tyson, for coming. Got any last things to share, or?
What was that? I'm sorry?
Got any closing thoughts?
Nope, just keep on keeping bees. It's a great thing to do, and it's don't stop. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, thanks, Tyson.
Okay. Take care, Gary. Thanks.
Yep, thanks.